Hey everyone! Today we're gonna build a feedback form using Vue, Vite, and Tailwind CSS. We'll implement features like basic browser validation, a loading state, and a thank you screen. We'll also display success and error notifications, and even add dark mode support. It's a beginner-friendly, real-world project, and we'll build it completely from scratch, covering all the key details. By the end of this video, you'll know how to build a Vue 3 form with composables, reusable components, and clean state management, and how it all works together in a real app. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, let's set up our project. I've got the Vite website open in the browser and VS Code ready with an empty folder called Vue 3 feedback form. On the Vite homepage, let's click the Get Started button. That takes us to the Getting Started page, where we scroll down to the section called Scaffolding Your First Vite Project. And here we can see the command we need to create a new project. So I'll copy this command, open the integrated terminal in VS Code and paste it in. Then I'll just add a space and a dot at the end, so that Vite sets everything up right here in this folder. When I hit enter, it'll ask me a few questions one by one. I'll choose Vue as a framework. I'll pick TypeScript. I'm gonna skip this experimental feature. And yes, we want to install the dependencies and start the project. And now that the installation is completed, I'll go ahead and open the project in the browser. On the Mac, that's as simple as command clicking the link from the terminal. On Windows or Linux, just use Control click. And there it is, the default Vite Vue starter page up and running. Okay, let's explore the main project files. We'll start with package.json. It lists all the project dependencies and a few npm scripts. One to start the dev server, one to build for production, and one to preview the production build locally. In this tutorial, we'll mostly use npm run dev to start the local server. Next up is index.html, the entry point of our app. It's simple and minimal. There's a div with an ID of app, where the app will be rendered, and a script that links to src main.ts. Then comes main.ts. Here we import the create app function from Vue, our main CSS file, and the root component app.vue. Then we create the app and mount it to the same div we saw in the HTML file. After that we have style CSS. It includes some default styles, but we'll remove them since we'll be using Tailwind CSS instead. Next is app.vue. It imports the Hello World component, a small example included by Vite, and shows a simple layout with the Vite and Vue logos, basically what you can see in the browser. And we'll clear this out later and add our own code. There are also a few TypeScript config files, but we won't need to touch those. And finally, there's vite.config.js, and this file controls how Vite runs and builds the project, things like plugins, path, and other configuration options. And that's it for the main project files. Next, let's get Tailwind CSS set up. We'll start by stopping the dev server with Ctrl+C in the terminal. Now let's head over to tailwindcss.com and click Get Started. On the installation page, the Using Vite tab is already selected, and that's exactly what we need. Since we've already created our project, we can skip the first step and move straight to installing Tailwind. So let's grab this command and run it in the terminal. Once that's installed, we'll go to vite.config.ts and add Tailwind to the plugins array. just like that. Next we'll open style CSS, clear out everything inside, and add this single import line. Now we'll start the dev server again with npm run dev. Now the step 6 says make sure your compiled CSS is included in the head. Your framework might handle this for you, and that's exactly the case. Vite takes care of that for us, so we can start using Tailwind classes right away. And to make sure everything's working, let's grab this h1 from the example. And we're gonna open app.view and replace the entire content of the template with it. And as you can see, the styled heading shows up in the browser, which means Tailwind is set up and working properly. Now let's do a bit of cleanup. We'll rename the Hello World component to feedback form. And we're gonna replace its entire content with a simple heading, and h2 that says feedback form. Now let's go back to app.view and let's update the import. We can also remove these styles. And lastly, let's replace this h1 with the new component. And that's it. The setup's complete and we're ready to start building our feedback form. Alright, so now we're going to start adding the markup for our feedback form, and we'll use a form example from Tailwind as our starting point. You can get to it by searching for form layouts on the Tailwind site. The link will also be in the description. On this page there are several examples, and we're gonna use the first one, stacked. So first, if we take a look at the controls we've got up at the top right, here you can switch between preview and code to either see the live example or the underlying markup. Then if we look at the theme options, you can choose between light, dark, or system. If you pick the light theme, all the classes you see are for light mode. If you pick dark, you'll only see the dark mode classes. And if you pick system, you'll get the light classes plus the dark prefix versions for dark mode. We're gonna start with the light theme version for now, and later on we'll add support for dark mode ourselves. Finally, you can choose the format, HTML Reactor view, and we're going with the view version here. The first thing we want to do is set up the layout around our feedback form component. So in app.view, let's wrap feedback form in a div. And we'll add some Tailwind classes to it. Let's begin with min edge screen. So the container takes up the full height of the viewport. And then we'll add flags to enable flexbox and flex call. Since we'll need a vertical layout once we add the dark mode toggle later. Then we want to center the content, so I say item center and justify center. After that, let's add p6 for some padding around the page and bg gray 100 to give the entire layout a light background. Inside that, we'll create another div, and we're gonna add some Tailwind classes to control its width. So first width full, so it spans the full width on small screens. Then max width excel to limit how wide it can grow on larger screens. And finally a max auto, centered horizontally. Now it may look like the layout is aligned to the left, but that's just because the text inside the current H2 isn't centered. The element itself is centered. Then we can move over to feedback form.view and start building out the form structure. Inside the template, I'll say form, and let's style it. We'll begin with BG white to give the form a white background. Then we'll say P8 for some spacing inside the form. Then we'll add rounded LG to soften the corners. And then shadow MD to lift it slightly off the page. Inside the form, we'll start with the heading. In the Tailwind example, that's the profile title and a short description underneath. So I'll go ahead and copy those. Now I just want to enlarge the title and center them both. So on H2, we'll have text Excel. And I'm gonna add text center. Then we'll update the content. Our title says share your feedback. And the description says we are always looking to improve. After that, we can start adding the individual fields. First, I'm gonna copy the grid container from the example. This gives us the layout we need for alignment and spacing between the elements. And we'll begin with name. Now we want this to be a full width input. And in the example, the closest match is the street address field. So I'm gonna copy that over. Let's update the label. So it says your name. Next, we'll rename the field from street address to name using multiple cursors in VS Code. And we'll also add a placeholder that says, what should we call you? Right under that, we'll add the email input. And for that, we're gonna grab the email block from the example. And let's also make sure it spans the full width, just like the name input. So call span full. And the label says your email. We're also gonna add a placeholder with a dummy email, so name @example.com. Next up is the category field. And for this, we're gonna reuse this country drop-down from the example. So let's switch back to code and grab this block. And let's make sure it spans the full width, just like the other fields. And then we'll rename country to category, again using multiple cursors. Now, as you can see, the example uses the chevron down icon, and the icon itself comes from the hero icons view package, so we need to install that. So let's open the terminal, stop the dev server, and run npm install hero icons view. Once that's done, we can start the server again. And let's import the icon. For that, I'm gonna copy the script setup block, and I'm gonna paste it at the top of the component. We don't need this. Now we're gonna replace the country options with our own, and to save some time, I'm just gonna copy those. This includes the default please select option that is shown when nothing is selected. And now each option has a value attribute. The options we'll use are please select as the default, bug report, feature request, improvement, and other. Next, we'll add the experience rating section. And instead of the standard radio buttons from the Tailwind example, we're gonna make it a bit more fun and visual by using emojis. So below category, we'll say rating. And we'll add another call spanful wrapper. Let's jump to the example. Here we have this push notification radio group. We'll use it as our starting point, so let's grab the code. Now we're gonna customize it. First we'll change the legend to "How was your experience?" And we'll replace font semi-bold with font medium. Then we'll drop the paragraph underneath. Next we'll remove the space Y class from this wrapper div and change the margin top to empty 4. Now we're gonna turn this div into flexible, into a responsive grid, so we say grid, then grid calls 1, so it shows 1 column on small screens, then SM column grid calls 5 to switch to 5 columns once we hit the small breakpoint, and finally gap 3 to give each option some space. Then we're gonna get rid of the second and the third options, so we're left with only one radio button to style. So let's do that, just like that, and here we say 1. Now we're gonna remove the entire class attribute from this wrapper div and all the classes from the input. Then we're gonna hide the input with SR only. That stands for screen reader only. It keeps the input accessible but removes it from the visual layout. Then we add peer. That means we can style the label based on whether the input is selected. We'll give the input the name of rating. And we'll set the value to 1. Then we'll update both the ID and the 4 attributes to rating 1. And then we'll remove the default checked state. Now let's restyle the label. First, instead of the text, we'll drop in the first emoji. Then we'll remove all the current classes from the label. So we say flex, items center, and justify center. So the emoji sits perfectly centered inside the box. Next we'll add an outline with outline 1 and outline gray 300 to keep it light. And then we add P3 for some padding. Then rounded MD to round the corners. After that we apply text to Excel to size up the emoji. We'll also add transition all for smooth animations and hover scale 110 for a small pop on hover, and hover outline indigo 600 to change the outline color on hover. Finally, we'll add the peer classes, so peer checked, and again outline indigo 600 to highlight the selected option, and peer checked outline 2 to make that outline a bit thicker when it's active. Once the first option looks right, we'll duplicate it for the remaining 4 ratings, and we're gonna update the IDs and values and swap in the right emojis. So let's do that. So the second option, the third one, the fourth button, and the last one. Okay. Below rating we have the message text area. For the message field we'll take the about block from the Tailwind example. Let's remove this paragraph. Then we'll rename everything from about to message. And add a placeholder that says share your thoughts. Next we have the email me about updates checkbox. We'll refer to this as the notify field. For this one we're going to use the comments checkbox from the notifications block. Now let's create a new div with call span full and space y6. Now let's copy the checkbox markup from the example. We're gonna grab this entire div with flex and gap 3. From there we'll customize it for our form. First we'll remove this paragraph and the corresponding area described by attribute. Then we'll rename everything from comments to notify. Then we'll update the label text. It says email me about updates. And we'll also remove the font medium class so it matches the rest of our labels. Finally, at the bottom of the form, we'll add the submit button. Let's create a new call span full wrapper. Now let's copy the submit button from the example. We'll add the W full class to it, so it stretches across the form, and we'll update the text to send feedback. Okay, with that, the entire markup for our feedback form is complete. Now let's move on to adding form state. At the top of the script, I'll import ref from view. And we'll create a separate ref for each field in the form that will hold whatever the user types or selects. So we say const name equals ref, and it's set to an empty string by default. Same for email and category. Next we've got rating, which is a number and it's set to 0 by default. The next one is message, which is an empty string by default. And lastly, notify, and it stores a boolean value and is set to true because we want this checkbox to be checked by default. With the state in place, we can connect it to the template, so we'll add vModel to each form field. We'll start with name, so we say vModel equals name, and the same for email and category. Next is rating, and all of the rating inputs use the same vModel, which is just rating. So I'm gonna copy that for the rest of the inputs. And the last one. Okay, the next field is message. vModel equals message. And the last one is notify. At this point, the entire form is fully reactive, and Vue automatically keeps the inputs and our state in sync. And to show that in action, I'll go ahead and open a Vue DevTools. If you don't have it, you can just Google for View Dev Tools, and you can grab it from the Chrome Web Store, and there's also a Firefox version as well. Back to our app. Let's refresh the page just in case. And in the Components tab of the extension, we can select our feedback form component, and you can see all of our refs listed on the right. Now, if I start interacting with any of the fields, you'll see the state update in real time. So I'll go ahead and fill something in for each field. Let's enter a name, and the name ref gets updated. And let's enter the email. Then I'll select category and the rating. Then I'll type something into message. So let's say hello from John. And lastly, let's uncheck email me about updates. And the notify ref gets set to false. So everything looks good so far. Next, we're going to refactor the form state into a composable. Our form is small right now, but if it grows, keeping this logic in a composable makes the component much easier to manage. So inside the src folder, we'll create a new folder called composables. Inside this folder, I'll create a new file called usefeedbackform.ts. And inside the file, we say export default function use feedback form. And I'm gonna move all the refs into it. So first I'll move the import statement. And then the refs themselves. So I'm gonna grab these. Now we need to return the values from the function, so say return. And I'm gonna copy that to save some time. Okay, then back in our component we need to import the composable we just created. So import use feedback form. And we're gonna pull out the values we return from the composable. So we say const use feedback form, and I'm just gonna copy the value we return from the function. Okay, at this point nothing really changes in terms of behavior. The form should still work exactly the same. So let's refresh the page and select our component again. And just to confirm that everything's still working, I'll select a category. And you can see the state updating as before. Next step is handling the form submission. Inside our useFeedbackForm composable, I'll create a new async arrow function called handleSubmit. This function acts as our submit handler. It receives the browser submit event, which is typed as submit event in TypeScript. The first thing we do in there is we call event prevent default. so the browser doesn't reload the page when the user submits the form. And for now, I'm just gonna console log the event. So we can see that our handler is being called, and we wanna return it from the composable, so handle submit. Now back in the component, we're gonna pull handle submit out, so it's available here. And then on the form tag, we say add submit equals handle submit. That tells you to run our handle submit function whenever the form is submitted. And if we now hit the submit button, we can see the submit event in the browser console. Next, we can make the submission feel a bit more realistic. I'll create a small send request helper that simulates a submission by waiting for a second and logging the form values. So inside our composable, I say const send request equals async. And here we just wanna await for a promise that resolves in 1 second. And after that, we'll console log the form values. Now, in the follow-up video, we're going to build a simple Node.js backend. So this request actually hits a server, but here I'll just leave a reminder comment. After that, I'll add a reset function that clears out the fields when the request is finished. So we say const reset arrow function. And inside we simply reset each ref to its default value. Now we can update the handle submit function. So first we prevent default, then we're gonna send request. So await send request. And then we'll reset the form. Let's submit the form and see what happens. So the values get logged after a second and the fields are cleared. The last thing we need is a loading state. So we know when a submission is in progress. I'll add a new ref called isSubmitting. And it is set to false by default. Inside handle submit, we're gonna check if we're already submitting. So if is submitting value. If it's true, then we're gonna return early to avoid submitting twice. Otherwise, we're setting it to true. And back to false once everything completes. So is submitting false. And we also return it from the composable. And we destructure it in the form along with everything else. So is submitting, comma. On the submit button, we want to disable it while is submitting is true and swap the text to sending ... during that time. So we say column disabled equals is submitting. And we're also adding these classes so it looks visually inactive during submission. And we're swapping the text to sending ... if the submitting is true. Let's give it a shot. And it's working as expected. And finally, I'll add the required attribute to each field, accept the notify checkbox. That will give us simple built-in browser validation without having to write any manual checks. So let's do that. So first on the name input we say required. And I'm just gonna copy it and add to everything else. So email, category, and then all the rating inputs, so we can use multiple cursors. And lastly, we're adding it to message. Again, the notify field is not required, it is optional. Now, when we try to submit the form with an empty name, the browser blocks it. And if we fill in the name but leave the email empty, let's say, it's blocked again. And once all the required fields are filled in, the form submits as expected. Next, we're gonna add a simple success screen that shows up after the form is submitted. To start, I'll create a new component called feedback success. And for now, I'll just have it say feedback success. Now let's bring this new component into feedback form. So we're gonna import it at the top. And then in the template, we're gonna place it right above the form. Here we go. We want only one of them to be displayed at the time, so I'll set up a simple conditional display. For now, I'll just hardcode a condition on the feedback success component using the if true. And we'll say velse on the form tag. With that in place, the form disappears and we only see the success screen. Now let's build out the content of the success screen. Inside it, I'm gonna reuse the same layout we already have in the form, just so everything feels consistent. So I'm gonna copy the styles from the form tag and I'm gonna apply them to this div. Then I'll add min age 72 to give it some height. And then I'll turn it into a vertical flex box by adding flex and flex and call. Then I'll add item center and justify center, so everything sits nicely centered. Next, I'll copy the heading and the paragraph from the form and I'll just update the text. The title says, "Thank you for your feedback." And the paragraph says, "We appreciate your input and we'll use it to improve our service." So let me just copy that. We'll also add a check icon to give the success screen a more polished look, but first we need to import it from the hero icons package. First, let's add a script at the top. And inside the script we do import check icon. And we'll add it right above the title. Then we'll give it an indigo color and set the size to match the design. So text indigo 600. Then W16 and H16. Okay. Once that works, I move on to make it a dynamic. Inside use feedback form composable, we'll add another ref called show success. And we set it to false by default. Then we return it from the composable. And we'll pull it out in feedback form. And now we can replace this hard-coded true with show success. Now view shows the success screen only when show success is true. Next, inside handle submit, after the simulated request, I'm gonna set it to true. And I'll also wrap the request in a try catch finally block. So let's add one. The try handles the request. The catch gives us a place for future error handling. And for now, we'll just say console error submitting form, and then the error value. And finally, make sure we always reset the submitting, no matter what happens. With that in place, Vue takes care of switching between the form and the success screen for us. Let's submit the form now. And we can see the success screen once the form is submitted. At this point, both the form and the success screen share the same card styles, so it makes sense to extract that into a reusable component. I start by creating a new component called feedback card. In there, I'll add a div with a slot. Now I'm gonna move the card-related classes from the form onto that div. That's all this component does, it's just a layout wrapper. Let's move back to feedback form. First we're gonna import the newly created component at the top. So import feedback card. Then we're gonna wrap the entire form with it. And we also need to move the VLs onto it. Nothing changes visually, but the styles now live in one place. Next we're gonna do the same thing in feedback success. So we import feedback card. Then we remove the card related classes from the wrapper div. And finally, we wrap the entire markup with it. Now both the form and the success screen use the same card component, and we've removed the duplicated styles. Now let's refactor the rating section. We're gonna pull the rating buttons out of feedback form and move them into a reusable component. That keeps the form cleaner and keeps the rating logic in one place. So let's start by creating a new component called feedback form rating. And we're gonna move this entire field set block from feedback form to the new component. We say template and paste it in. Then we're gonna define the model. First we create a script block and we say const model equals define model, and it's gonna store a numeric value, so number. That's the model view 3 way to support vModel in a component. Next we add the ratings array. And it contains a value and an emoji for each option. Now let's jump down to the template. We're gonna keep the first option and remove the rest. Then we'll add a v4 on the wrapper div, so it loops over ratings. We say v4 rating in ratings, and we're gonna use rating value as the key. From there, we're gonna replace the hard-coded IDs, values, and emojis with dynamic values from the array. So first we make the ID dynamic. I'm gonna wrap the value with backticks and replace the hard-coded one with rating value. And the value of the for attribute on the label is identical. Let's make the value dynamic, so it's rating value. And the model now is just model. That's what we've defined above. And lastly, what we need is we need to make the emoji dynamic. Here we say rating dot emoji. At this point, the rating UI is fully driven by the array. Back in feedback form, we import the new component. And we're gonna drop it in exactly where the field set was. So here we say feedback form rating, and we add vModel equals rating. So that's it. Now everything's wired up again, and the form, but the form stays clean. And finally, let's open the Vue DevTools and make sure everything's working. So if I now select feedback form rating component and click a few emojis, we can see the model value updating. Now if I select feedback form and then select a new rating value, it updates as well. So everything stays in sync. Before moving on, let's look at another way to handle the form state using Reactive. So far, each form field uses its own ref, and that works perfectly fine here. But Vue also gives us Reactive, which lets us group related state into a single object. For a form like this, this can be a nice alternative. So let's refactor the form state and see how it looks. First, let's define a shared type for the form data. So I'll go ahead and create a new folder inside src called types. Then inside I'll create a new file called feedback.ts. In there we define a feedback interface that represents the shape of our form data. This gives us a single source of truth for what a feedback submission looks like. Now let's refactor the form state. We'll start inside use feedback form. Here, instead of creating a ref for each field, we switch to a single form object created with Reactive. First, I'll import Reactive from Vue, and then our feedback type. So import type feedback. Then we say const form equals reactive, and we pass feedback in as a generic type, so TypeScript knows the shape of the object, and all the form fields go in there. Let me just copy that, and just like that. Because it's reactive, we no longer need to use .value. We can work directly with the properties. Now, the submit logic stays the same, but now we can simply log the form object. And we also reset each property directly on form. So let's say form dot, and then we can remove the value. With that in place, we return form instead of individual refs from the composable. Next, let's move on to the feedback form component. Use feedback form now gives us a single form object instead all of the refs. So we say form. And for each field, we now need to update vModel to use the reactive object. So let's use multiple cursors and select every vModel attribute in the file. And then for each value, we add form dot. So for the name field, we have form name. For email, it's form email, and so on. And the rating component follows the same pattern. So vModel is form.rating. Okay, everything is wired up again, just using a single reactive object for the form state. And to wrap it up, let's open the view of tools. Now, if I select the feedback form component, we can see our reactive form object on the right. And if I start typing something, we can see it's updating live. So the behavior stays exactly the same. We're just managing the state in a different way. Let's do one more small refactor here. But first I'm gonna remove these unused refs. So right now the form's initial values are duplicated in a couple of places. To clean that up, we'll move them into a small helper function. Inside useFeedbackForm, we'll go ahead and create a new function called createInitialFormState. And it's gonna return the default form values. Now we can use that function both to initialize the form and reset it. We use it first when creating the reactive form. Then we reuse it in the reset logic. Instead of resetting each field manually, we assign the initial state back onto the form. So we say object assign form, and then we call the function. Now let's remove this. Technically, we don't really need to reset the form here, since we show the success screen after submit, but it's still a good practice and keeps the logic reusable. If we refresh the page now and open the view of tools, you can see the form is initialized with the default values. And if we submit the form, you can see it reset back to the same initial values. Let's add notifications so user get feedback when the form is submitted. We start by creating a new component called notification message. Inside the template, we'll create a single div with the text notification message. Next, we go to feedback form and we import this new component. And we're gonna render it right below the form. With that in place, we can already see it showing up on the page. Now we can start styling it. First we position it with fixed. Then we say left 1/2 and negative translate x 1/2. This way we center it horizontally. Next, top 6 places it near the top of the screen, and Z50 makes sure it stays above everything else. Next we add px4 and py2 for padding, then round it for soft corners, and shadow LG to lift it off the page a bit. For the text we use text small, text SM, font medium, and text center. And finally, we give it a success look with text green 800 and BG green 100. Now let's make this component reusable. Before wiring up the props, we'll define some shared notification types. So we create a new file at src types notifications.ts. In there, we define a notification message type, which is a string or null. Next, we define a notification type, which can be either success, error, or null. Then we export a notification interface, and it combines both. It has a message and a type. With that in place, we go back to notification message. And let's create a script block. And inside we import the notification type. And we'll use it with define props. So define props, notification. That gives us access to message and type as props. Next, we add the-if to the div. So the-if equals message. So it only renders when there's something to show. Then we're gonna make the class dynamic. First we add a column and then wrap all the classes with single quotes, and then we put that into square brackets. And now we can use the type prop to control the styles. So we're gonna add a ternary as the second element of the array. If the type equals success, then we apply the green styles. Otherwise, we fall back to red styles for errors. So we're just gonna copy these and we simply replace green with red. And finally, the content of the div comes directly from the message prop. Backend feedback form, let's test it out. We'll start with the success notification. So we say message equals success message, and we set the type to success, and here we go. When then we change it to an error message and set type to error, and we can see an error message being displayed. And if we remove the type attribute, then nothing will change because we default to error if the type is not provided. So that tells us the component is working correctly for both cases. Now we'll introduce a new composable to handle the notification logic. So inside the composables folder, we'll create a new file, use notifications. Inside we say export default function, use notifications. At the top we import ref from view. And then the notification types we defined earlier. Import type, notification message and notification type. Then inside the composable we'll create two refs. So first const notification message of type notification message, and it's set to null by default. And similarly notification type, and it is also set to null by default. Then we'll create a function that set both values and clear them automatically after a timeout. So we're gonna call it show notification, and it's gonna be an arrow function. It takes message of type notification message, a type, notification type, and duration, which defines for how long the notification stays on the page, and we're gonna set it to 4 seconds by default. And inside we're simply gonna assign the value we passed into our refs, and then we're gonna clear them out after a timeout. So notification message value equals message, and notification type value equals type. Then we say set timeout, and we use duration as the delay. And inside set timeout we simply reset our refs to null. Then we return the refs and the function from the composable. Here we go. Now we go to use feedback form, and we'll will import this new composable at the top. Then we're gonna call it right below the refs. So const empty object for now. Use notifications. And let's copy the values we return from the composable. Okay, so after a successful submit, we're gonna display a success message. So we're gonna call our show notification function and pass this message. And the type is set to success in this case. If something goes wrong, we will call it again with an error message and a shorter duration. So we're gonna display this error message and it will stay on the page for 3 seconds. And we also want to move this reset call to the try block, because we don't want to clear the form in case of error. And the rest of the submit logic stays the same. Next we will return notification message and notification type from useDoc form. Now we go to the feedback form component and we'll destructure them. And now we can pass them into notification message. So message equals notification message and type equals notification type. The component now reacts to the composable state, and at this point everything is fully dynamic. Before testing this, let's add a small transition to the notification. First, in notification message, we'll wrap this div with a transition tag. And we'll give it the name fade. That name is important. Vue uses it to connect the transition at the tab and with the CSS classes we're about to add. Next, we'll add a styles code block. This is regular CSS, not Tailwind. And here we're gonna define a few transition classes that Vue automatically applies when the element enters or leaves the DOM. So we start with fade enter active, and then fade leave active. These control the animation itself. Fade enter active is applied while the element is entering, and fade leave active is applied while the element is leaving. In both cases we define the same transition. We're gonna animate the opacity over 300 milliseconds. So transition opacity 0.3 second and ease. Next we add the start and the end states. We add fade enter from and fade leave 2. And here we set opacity to 0. And this way the notification starts invisible when it shows and ends invisible when it hides. Because the transition name is fade, Vue automatically wires all of these classes together. So when the notification appears, it fades in, and when it disappears, it fades back out. And we're not changing any logic here, we're just adding a bit of a polish to how it looks. Now we can test the full flow. So let's submit the form. And we can see the success notification at the top, fading in and out. To test the error state, we'll need to add a simulated error. So let's go to the UseFeedback form composable. And here inside the send request function, right below await new promise, we say simulate error. And we're gonna throw an exception, so throw new error. And let's just say simulated submission error. And if we submit, we should see this error message. Yeah, here we go. Now we can comment this line out. And that's it. Notifications are fully wired up, animated, and working end-to-end. Right now the whole app is using indigo as its primary color, and that comes straight from the Tailwind example we started with. If we search the project for indigo, we can see it's used all over the place, mostly as indigo 600. For this project we want to use our own primary color, so we're gonna switch everything over to orange. First we go to style CSS, and here we're gonna define a Tailwind theme variable. So we say add theme, and inside the curly braces we say color primary. We're gonna set it to color orange 500. Now we can use primary everywhere instead of hard-coding Tailwind color classes. We'll see that in a minute. Next we search the entire project for indigo 600. And let's open the replace input. We're gonna replace all occurrences with primary. So once we confirm the entire form updates, buttons, outlines, icons, and rating states all switch to the new primary color. Now let's search again, but this time just for indigo. That shows one left over, which is the hover state on the submit button. So let's fix that. We're gonna replace this indigo 500 with a hover state based on primary color, but with a slightly lower opacity. So here we say BG primary at 90%. And if we go back to the browser and hover the submit button, we can verify the color now looks right. At this point, the primary color comes from a single value. And if we want to change the color in the future, it's just one update. For example, if we want switched from orange to blue later on, we just change that one value and the whole app updates, which is super nice. Alright, this is the final part of the video, and we're gonna finish things off by adding dark mode. We'll start with the theme toggle. This isn't really part of the feedback form itself. Normally something like this would control the theme for the entire app, and here we'll just add it so we can easily toggle dark mode. So first I'll create a new composable called use dark mode. Inside the function, we're gonna use a boolean ref called isDarkMode to track whether dark mode is active. So we say const isDarkMode, and we're gonna set it to false by default. Let's import ref from view. Then I'll add an update theme function. It's gonna check if isDarkMode is true. In this case, it's gonna add the dark less to the HTML element. Otherwise, it's gonna remove it from there. So if isDarkMode value, then we access the root HTML element by saying document element class list add dark, and if it's false, then we do the opposite. I'm just gonna copy this, and in this case we remove the class. Next we'll add another function called toggle theme. And it simply flips the value and calls update theme. So isDarkMode value equals whatever is the opposite. And we want to return isDarkMode and toggle theme from this composable. Next, let's create the dark theme toggle component. And for now, we'll just add a template and a div with a placeholder text. Now let's go to the app.view component and let's import the toggle component. And we're gonna render the toggle right below the form. So here it is. Back to the toggle component. Let's add a script block. And here we import the useDarkMode composable. And we're gonna call it below. And here we're gonna pull out is dark mode and toggle theme. To save some time, we'll just copy the template for this component. As I mentioned earlier, this toggle isn't really part of the feedback form. It's just here to make switching themes easy. So let me copy that. And let's quickly go over it. On the left we show light mode or dark mode based on the current state. In the middle there's a switch style button. And on the right we show a sun or a moon emoji. Clicking the button calls toggle theme. And the knob slides left or right using a conditional class tied to isDarkMode. So if isDarkMode is true, then the translateX6 class pushes it to the right, otherwise the translateX1 class pushes it to the left. If we now open the browser DevTools, we can see the toggle adds and removes the dark class on the root element. Next we'll update style CSS. We're gonna copy a small snippet from the Tailwind dark mode docs to enable manual dark mode. So let's open the Tailwind website. And here we'll search for dark mode. And let's grab this line. We're gonna put it right below the import. It tells Tailwind how to apply dark styles when the dark class is present. Anything inside an element with the dark class will be treated as dark mode. And since we add the dark to the root HTML element, dark mode styles apply across the entire app. To quickly test the theme switch, we'll update app.view and feedback card. So let's go to app.view. And here we'll add dark column BG gray 900. Now let's open feedback card. And we'll add dark column BG gray 800. Now when we toggle the theme, both components switch at the same time. Now let's tweak the primary color for dark mode. In style CSS, we're gonna add this snippet. It overrides the color primary variable inside Tailwind's dark variant at the theme level. This means that when the dark mode is active, the primary color automatically switches to a slightly lighter orange. Because this is defined on the root, the change applies globally and all the components pick it up without changing any classes. And that gives better contrast on dark backgrounds. Lastly, let's make the theme persistent. Let's open use dark mode, and inside update theme we're gonna store it in local storage. So if dark mode is active, then we say local storage, set item, theme, and we set it to dark in this case. Otherwise, we set it to light. Then I'll import unmounted from view. And I'm gonna initialize the theme when the composable runs. So we say onMounted, and we pass in a callback. And here we're gonna write some code which is based on this snippet in the Tailwind, from the Tailwind docs. So first we check if a theme is saved in local storage. So const saved theme, local storage, get item, theme. And if not, we fall back to the system preference using prefers color scheme, which is basically this thing. Here we say const prefers dark, and we set it equal to this thing. And based on that, we'll set is dark mode and call update theme. So is dark mode value if the saved theme is dark, or we don't have anything saved and the system preference is dark. Okay, let's test it out. So if we refresh the page, the dark theme stays there, and if we toggle it to light, nothing changes after the page refresh. And if we go look at local storage, we can see the value changes after we toggle the switch. Now, if we remove the value from local storage and then refresh the page, the app starts in light mode and light gets saved. Let's open Chrome settings and then go to appearance and switch mode to dark. If we now remove the value again and refresh the page, the app loads in dark mode and the correct value is saved. So now the app loads with the correct theme automatically. Now that the dark mode is set up, all that's left is updating the remaining components to support it. From here it's mainly about adding the dark prefix classes when they're needed. Let's start with feedback form. So we'll go to the Tailwind example again. And here we'll switch the theme option to system. That way we can see the light and dark classes side by side. First we'll update the form title and description by adding dark text colors. So let me copy the color for the title. And then the color for the description. Here we go. Next we'll copy the label color from the example and we'll apply it to all labels at once. And it's just dark text white. So let's add it to the name label, and then to email label, then to category, and then message, and lastly to the notify label. So now all the labels are white in dark mode. After that, we'll go to the email block in the example, and we're gonna copy all the dark classes from this input. So we're gonna grab them all starting from this one. Let's add it to the name input first. And here I'm gonna swap this indigo 500 with primary /90. Now let's copy them again from here. And we'll add it to the email input. And then to the category select. And message text area. Alright. Lastly, I'll copy the dark color for the chevron icon. So let's search for chevron. There it is. Next up is feedback form rating. We'll add the same dark text white color to the legend tag that we use for all the labels. So now it's white. And we'll also darken the outline color of the emoji buttons so they look better on a dark background. So on the label tag we say dark, outline gray 600. Then we move on to notification message. For the success notification, the dark background color is dark BG green 900/80, and the text color is text green 100. For the error notifications, we'll just replace green with red. Let's test it out. So if we submit the form, we see the updated success notification. Now let's simulate an error. So we'll go to the use feedback form composable, and here we'll uncomment this line. Let's submit the form again. And we can see the updated error message. Let's comment it out again. Finally, we'll update the success screen. Just like the form, we'll add dark text colors to the heading and description. So let's copy those. The title color and the description color. Now let's submit the form. And once I hit save, it gets updated. Since the card already supports dark mode, Everything blends in nicely, and with that, our app fully supports dark mode. That brings us to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, feel free to like the video, share and subscribe. It really helps get the channel off the ground. In the next one, we're gonna dive into building the Node.js backend, so our form can actually send data to a server. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.